More than 1,350 people are now confirmed to have died after that powerful earthquake struck northern Syria and southeastern Turkey just before dawn. It struck in the early hours and had a magnitude of 7.8. Turkey's President Erdogan said 912 people had died and almost 600 had been injured. In his country, in war-torn Syria, 326 are reported to have died in government-held areas and a further 140 in rebel-held areas. With thousands of people still missing, these numbers are sadly expected to rise. The BBC's Emre Tamil is in Istanbul and he sent this update.
The Turkish armed forces have set up an air corridor to enable search and rescue teams to reach the zone affected by this major earthquake. Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar released a statement a short while ago saying that Turkey mobilized its planes to send medical teams, search and rescue teams and their vehicles to the earthquake zone. Turkey's Vice President Fuat Oktay said 284 people had been killed. 2,323 people were injured in 10 provinces. However, it's feared that the death toll will rise because of the heavy damage. In only one province, Malatya province, the governor Hulusi Şahin said at least 130 buildings were tumbled down in the province. There were more than 70 aftershocks. The magnitude of the biggest one was 6.6. And as you see, authorities scrambled rescue teams and supply aircraft to the affected zone. They also declared state of emergency in affected provinces and urged people not to use their mobile phones to allow rescuers to coordinate all these efforts. A level 4 alarm has been declared, which means Turkey is calling for international assistance as well. The chief of the Turkish Red Cross Relief Agency issued an appeal for blood donations. Obviously, it's in the middle of winter in Turkey. The weather conditions are severe. There have been severe weather warnings before. That's why it's a kind of racing against the time right now. And rescue teams are doing their utmost best to take people, save the people under the rubble. Obviously, Turkey is among the most earthquake-prone countries in the world. And this latest earthquake is the most severe earthquake in Turkey since 1991. When a similar magnitude, 7.4 quake, devastated Izmir, which is close to the country's biggest city, Istanbul, and heavily populated Eastern Marmara region. And this earthquake killed more than 17,000 people then. Obviously, the government issued a new regulations following this earthquake, and lots of buildings have been renewed as well. But now we are talking about the relatively underdeveloped regions of Turkey, which has been affected by this earthquake. That's why it has been fearful that lots of buildings have been tumbled down due to this earthquake. As far as we know, oil flows are continuing. Operations, however, at the Ceyhan oil terminal in southern Turkey were suspended because this Eastern Mediterranean terminal is 155 kilometers away from the area where the earthquake happened. And Turkey's state pipeline operator BOTAŞ earlier said that natural gas flows were halted to Gaziantep, which has been mostly affected city following this earthquake, and 80 people out of 284 lost their lives in the city Gaziantep due to the earthquake.
Someone who knows the area well is our Europe regional editor, Paul Moss, who joins me now. Paul, so you've been to Gaziantep, you've been to Diyarbakir. What can you tell us about how these areas would fare in an earthquake such as this?
I think both of those cities are particularly bad places, if such a thing could be said, for an earthquake to hit, for different reasons. Diyarbakir is very, very beautiful, but for one main reason, it's an ancient city and it has lots of very old buildings. I had a wonderful time wandering around its old heartland, but many of these buildings have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. One suspects they're not going to fare very well in the event of an earthquake. I should also say this is a Kurdish city and the people there have already suffered greatly in the past few decades. They were very much caught up in the ongoing war between the Turkish state and the Kurdish minority. So this is a place where people already have suffered. Gaziantep's different. Gaziantep is also an ancient city. The buildings there are more modern, but what Gaziantep does have is a huge number of refugees from the Syrian conflict. It's right on the border. The population is 2 million. 500,000 of those are refugees. Now, they're not in camps. The vast majority are in the city itself. This means the conditions are very crowded there, and one can only imagine just what it's like when one of those buildings collapses. A statistic that struck me, we know that they've said 1,700 buildings in Turkey have been completely destroyed. Now, we don't know the death toll, but if you think about those buildings being destroyed, it gives you some idea what to expect. I should also say one other thing that jumped out at me was that Gaziantep Castle had been badly damaged. Now, why I mention this is not just because it's a castle. This is a building that was a huge part of the city. It was built by the Romans. That building has stood for nearly 2,000 years. If this earthquake was powerful enough to damage that castle very badly, again, one can only imagine what it's done to other buildings within the city.
And Turkey has suffered earthquakes before. How much, therefore, are they prepared for something like this? Given the scale of it, we heard President Erdogan say a little earlier that this was the biggest disaster for Turkey since 1939.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is they should be prepared because of how common earthquakes are. The last major earthquake was in 1999. People are still arguing about the death toll, probably between 20,000 and 45,000. Now, a lot of buildings on that occasion collapsed. When investigators looked at them, they found they had not been built to correct regulations, the correct building standards. They decided they were going to do something about this. The first thing they did is prosecute lots of the builders, but hardly any of those prosecutions succeeded. There were a lot of arguments that the authorities had ignored building regulations, and that's why the buildings collapsed so fast. There were promises that buildings were going to be retrofitted to make them more earthquake-proof. I don't think there's been very much sign of that.